Hey, I'm Sass, and this is my domestic policy gauntlet. I am unequivocally in favor of universal healthcare, quality universal healthcare. We are so far behind the rest of the world on this. Medicare for All specifically is one path to get there. If Medicare for All came to the floor for a vote, whether it was Bernie Sanders or Pramila Jayapal's version, I would vote yes, clip it, record it. But I also don't see it as the only path. So many representatives seem to have their own version of healthcare. I haven't developed my own. I don't feel a need to because everybody else seems to have. One of the things I want to highlight about universal healthcare is that it's complicated. We're not going to get it right on the first try. It's going to take time and tweaking, but we cannot continue talking about like CEO incentives or like making minor adjustments to premium rates. We need to make that jump. We need to take a big step to or toward universal healthcare. There are some like little modifications I would like to make. I think the private industry should be allowed to stick around for a couple reasons because, like I said, it's going to take time. The U.S. government, federal government has been very bad at logistics for quite a while. And it's going to take time for people to trust the government. And I think that people should be free to use what they trust. And then the goal should be for the government to outcompete the private sector. Over time, the end game that I actually envision would be that you would have this like tiny slice of the private sector, which is made of the few medical professionals who are in it for the money rather than helping people. And they would be servicing rich people. And they kind of be off of their own little corner over there. And I'm not worried about them. They'll be fine. And the rest of us will take care of each other because that's really what universal healthcare is about. It's about taking care of each other. And I would want it to be implemented more quickly, but I'm not too picky at the end of the day. If those modifications didn't happen, that wouldn't stop me from voting for it because I do see Medicare for All as being leading to a massive improvement in the health of the country. And that's really what it's about, right? That's what matters at the end of the day. How are we improving healthcare across the country equitably in a massive way? And I do mean a massive way. We're so far behind that we need to just be in a move fast, break things kind of mode. I'm absolutely would be in favor of Medicare for All or any other system that gets us to or very close to universal healthcare. And in terms of like ensuring that I don't shift my mind on that later, you can check out my Democracy Gauntlet where I talk more about a government accountability platform that's directed and run by the people to ensure that my interests and the interests of all of our representatives stay aligned with the people. So universal healthcare, I'm all for it. Medicare for All is one great way to get there. When fracking first started, there was this kind of debate around like, well, if you do it right, it could end up being okay and working out and not causing a lot of environmental destruction. What we've seen, the reality is that hasn't happened. And there's really no reason to believe that it will. I actually believe that all fracking should be banned. Of course, we would also need to combine that with an unconditional basic income to ensure that potential increases in gas prices don't affect those who would be most disproportionately affected by it. I definitely think that hydrofracking, we shouldn't have any more of it. Definitely no offshore fracking. But we need to dramatically reduce, if not remove, fracking because it is contaminating groundwater and it's causing other problems too. In Houston, we're seeing fracking is leading to the ground sinking. Houston obviously is having a problem with hurricanes. And we can't afford for that city to continue to sink deeper and deeper. But of course, it's only one piece of water. There are over 2 million Americans in the US who don't have clean running water. And honestly, you could argue it's probably a lot more than that. Flint, Michigan, of course, is the prime example of one place where it's been a problem, but it's been happening all over the country in more subtle ways that we haven't been seeing. In terms of the Clean Water Act, fracking isn't the only way that groundwater is being destroyed. We're seeing many of our rivers being polluted with a bunch of waste coming off of chemical manufacturing plants. We've seen like sugarcane plants in Florida, like the red tide, and all these variety of different problems. Strengthening just generally the restrictions that we have and the regulations, the environmental regulations that we have around polluting groundwater and rivers and drinking water. Giving more resources to the Environmental Protection Agency, which is the enforcement agency for these regulations. I think if they had more resources and more staffing and more money, they could better enforce these regulations, which would be really, really important. So it's a combination of things that need to happen to help actually get clean water to people. I'm super in favor of what we see in the current infrastructure bill that just got passed by the Senate to replace every lead pipe in America. Super into that. That was, I think, actually the most important thing to me, because again, I think that the clean water problem is a problem that tends to go very under the radar for a lot of folks, and that is such an incredible necessity. But yeah, totally in favor of everything to help clean up our water and to make it so water is no longer a problem for people in this country, because it really shouldn't be. In terms of the specific question of should ICE be abolished or reformed, I'm actually closer to abolished than I am to reform. We've seen that it's not really accomplishing a lot of the things that it needs to actually reduce the amount of terrorism in the country, particularly as domestic terrorism is at much higher rates than terrorism from foreign folks. You know, if we want to address the immigration issue, I mean, this is so deep and complex, and I'm not going to cover everything right now. First and foremost, we need to stop destabilizing every freaking country in the world. Wealthy nations around the world are running into this problem now where they're all dealing with a refugee crisis. And the reality is because wealthy nations and powerful nations, particularly the US, continue to destabilize entire continents at this point. That's a huge piece of it, but also like creating simplified and streamlined ways for people to gain citizenship. And we've seen just massive human rights violations. I'm definitely closer to the abolish idea around ICE. I just think that we need to completely rethink, start from scratch, go to the drawing board. How do we actually address this? You know, in terms of, you know, how quickly or whatever, like, again, this is a complex issue, but we've certainly seen that ICE is not making the country better, it's making it worse. One of the things that I say quite often is diversity without division. Diversity is one of the greatest strengths of the US, while division is one of our greatest weaknesses. We can work to preserve the former while working to eliminate the latter, and ICE does not help us in that mission. I would be in favor of giving amnesty to undocumented workers. Of course, the whole point of this in the first place, and we should absolutely follow through on this, is to create that pathway to and towards citizenship. You think about immigration a lot like prohibition. When people are just trying to escape terror and torment from their home countries and coming here, you know, particularly when that is a result of destabilization of those countries from US military intervention, which is kind of a light word, but to be totally honest, banning it, which is almost what our immigration process is. It's almost banning immigration. It is so difficult. It is such a long and lengthy and complex process that costs us a lot of money, by the way. It's incredibly expensive on the taxpayer. That leads to us having a lot of undocumented immigrants. And so if we if we simplify and streamline the process, we will see a lot more people actually go through that process. And then again, we can add to the diversity of the country in a way that is positive and healthy and actually strengthens the country. Unfortunately, there's a lot of dangerous rhetoric and misinformation around this topic. If you go back to my democracy gauntlet, I talk about the root causes of some of our division, like the choose one voting. And I've also talked about how profit-driven media leads to, and the combination of news and opinion has led to this really polarizing, divisive rhetoric and the spread of misinformation. And so we can separate news from opinion, apply fairness doctrine to opinion, and work to decouple news from the profit motive through things like journalism vouchers, where people get $120 a year that they can put only towards subscription journalism. Then we can work to reduce some of those effects, and also work, like I said before, with the democracy gauntlet of working toward more consensus-based politics. We can start to have a major reduction in that. We'll see a major reduction in that kind of rhetoric around immigration. I believe that our diversity contributes to our strength. And so, yes, I'd absolutely be in favor of amnesty, as well as creating a real pathway for immigrants, as well as providing extra tools and education to help people become accustomed to the culture. There are a lot of folks who come here who want to take on the American culture, and I think that if that's what they want to do, we should provide a way for them to do that. There's a lot that goes into this issue. There's no one thing, right? We have to pour through the immigration code and go line by line and go through all the things that need to change. But I'm absolutely on the side of making this process easier and simpler and granting amnesty, yes. The stance of Americans on abortion is actually far more universal than you think. And it is that we all want to reduce abortion. Where what we know is we have the data. We know what it takes to reduce abortion. And it mostly comes down to empowering women and families. So whether you're talking about universal childcare or you're talking about universal health care and explicitly addressing the disparities in health for women and people of color, women of color, whether you're talking about universal basic income to help recognize the work that women do that we don't pay for, such as child rearing and family care, whether you're talking about comprehensive sex and relationship parenting education, both for teens and for adults, whether you're talking about providing family planning tools, whether from contraception to whatever else education, whatever else it may be, providing all of that. Those are all things that we know lead to a reduction in abortion. The one thing that we know does not lead to a reduction in abortions is making abortions harder to get. Much like I said with immigration, as comparing it to prohibition, making abortion harder to get does not reduce abortion. It just turns would-be safe abortions into unsafe abortions. What I was talking earlier about the stance of the vast majority of Americans is we want to reduce abortion. I will say that after talking to thousands of Texans, I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, I wouldn't get an abortion myself, but I believe that others should be able to choose to make their own choice. And I'd say that exact stance is about 50% of those folks identified as pro-life and about 50% of those folks identified as pro-choice, despite the fact that they had the exact same stance. These terms, pro-life and pro-choice, are totally distorted and twisted by our media and our echo chambers to mean things that they don't mean, and they're not useful in discussing this issue. And so I'm not identifying with either of them because I just don't find it to be useful. I do support a woman's right to choose. I do support Roe v. Wade, and I would be in favor of codifying it. Of course, we've seen some legislatures like the Texas state legislature pass heartbeat bills or heartbeat laws to reduce access to abortion, which again, like I said, is only going to turn would-be safe abortions into unsafe abortions. We'll see what happens with the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm not in favor of controlling people. That's what this comes down to, and I think most people support people being able to make their own decision about it. Like over 99.9% of abortions that are performed not for a medical reason happen in the first trimester before any brain activity is detected. Obviously, we're getting into a more controversial part of this, but the way that we define that somebody is living is based on their brain, not on their heart. People's hearts stop all the time, but we don't consider them dead until we don't see brain activity anymore. So I don't see why that should be any different. When we look at the reality, when we look at the facts, we know what it takes to reduce abortion, and we know that Roe v. Wade is, at the end of the day, just protecting the freedoms that we all want for each other. And I think attaching these pro-choice, pro-life, pro-whole life, pro-abortion, or other terms I've heard, that I think that makes this conversation much more hostile, and that it ignores the parts that we actually agree on. So that's where I'm at. I absolutely support leveraging the USPS to provide public banking, but not for the reason of trying to make it so it looks like the USPS is profitable. I support it for the reason that the USPS exists in the first place, which is as a public service. Much like education The USPS isn't supposed to be profitable. It's supposed to be a public service. It's supposed to just make our communities better. And if that happens at a loss, that's fine with me. And if we also implement an unconditional basic income, like I talk about in my economy gauntlet, then we're gonna have to keep some of the really incredible benefits that the USPS has in order to continue having the workers that we need in that job. So I don't see a need to get rid of securing benefits for 70 years. I think that helps to make it competitive and to ensure that we have employment for this public service that's really important and an investment in our communities. And I would like to add public banking again for the sake of public service is really what it comes down to. It's just a convenient way to add that service. That's where I sit on the post office. We need post offices and we can leverage them to do all sorts of really cool things. And if that comes at a loss, I think that's totally worth it because it's a public investment.